Perfect. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Assembly Required. This is the first panel in a number of different panels that are going to be coming to you from the Arizona State University's Herberger Institute of Design and the Arts. This panel is on self-care and resilience for artists and creatives. I am your moderator today, DP Layton. I am the Assistant Director of Creative Careers here at ASU. My background is in photography and my pronouns are he, him, his. I want to let you guys know about some of the upcoming panels that we have. There's some QR codes as well as some tiny URLs for you guys to use. Both of these are coming up next Friday, May 22nd. The first at 11 a.m. is Exploring Creative Identity and Acts of Persistence. And then after that at 1 p.m. is another one on When Public Space Becomes a Risky Space. So please make sure to join us for those. Without further ado, I'd like to start introducing our panelists. First up is a good friend of mine, Jessica Muro.
Hi, everyone. I am a multidisciplinary visual artist. I work and am based out of Detroit, Michigan. I have a master's in fine art photography and a bachelor's in journalism and an associate's in commercial photography as well. In addition to that, I'm also a Reiki master and I've been studying energy work for probably over 10, 11 years now. She and her pronouns work for me. I'm excited to be here, guys.
Thank you. Next up, we have Marlena Robbins.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marlena Robbins. I am the Assistant Director of Cultural Coalition. I'm a visual artist. I work with acrylic and seed beads on canvas for the past 7 years. I received my master's in Indigenous Rights and Social Justice from ASU. I'm a mom, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlena. Last but certainly not least, we have LaVista Jones.
Hello, everyone. So I'm LaVista, like Asta, LaVista. I say that every time I say my name. I am here in Arizona by way of the great state of Ohio. I am a self-care coach and a business consultant. So I merge the two of those together by helping my clients get shit done in their businesses without burning themselves out. So we marry their systems and their self-care so that they are taking care of themselves while they are doing the work that they love. I am an undergraduate of Wittenberg University in Ohio, and I was a double major in biology and psychology.
Well, thank you all very much. So as this is a panel on self-care and resilience, I'd like to start with asking the question, what does self-care look like to you as an artist, as a professional, as a person navigating this world?
You want to start with me?
Sure.
Okay. I feel like self-care is kind of different for every person in a way. It's very much, I guess, in my opinion, shaped around your practice and your, like, who you are as a person. Different things are going to work for different people. So my particular journey of self-care started probably minimalist at first and then has grown as I have also grown in Reiki and energy work and also as a visual artist. So I do a lot of like your usual things that people think of with self-care, like baths and things that are really important for me to keep myself grounded and together and centered. But in addition to that, I have also found that allowing myself that time and allowing myself downtime in incorporating that into my practice is really important for my practice to continue and sustain over time.
Great, thank you. What about you, Marlena?
Self-care. So I started painting just after my son was born. I went to a brush bar with his dad, and you pay $50 and they give you a canvas and brushes and easel paints. And I just kind of fell in love with it from there. I hadn't been very artistic prior to that or exploring any type of creative venues. And it just became a way for me to turn everything off. So bills and school and work and drama and, you know, trying to learn what it was to be a mom, to become a mom. And so painting became my safety bubble, became my safety net. And that's how I learned to take care of myself and to say, okay, I can't take care of any of that other stuff. I can't help take care of my family until I take care of myself. And so painting and art and the creative process has been my go-to. And it's also helped me evolve into understanding myself as a whole. So how do I, when I feel myself getting out of balance, or I feel myself getting frustrated or angry or having anxiety, I take a step back and I look at each of the areas from the medicine wheel. So how am I taking care of myself mentally? How am I taking care of myself spiritually, emotionally, and physically? Physically, I can go for a run. I can take a walk. I can sit down and meditate. Mentally, read a book. I just downloaded the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat, I can't pronounce it. Forgive me, Thich Nhat Hanh. A couple of his books, The Art of Communication, another one called Anger. And so really taking time to understand myself as a human being first, and then as a mother, as a daughter, as a sister, as a friend, as a woman, and so on and so forth. It's been my journey with self-care.
Great, thank you. Lavista, what about you?
So, there are several things that I try to participate in for my own self-care. I try to get in quiet time because I am a wife and I am a mother to a very energetic 4-year-old who has energy for days and days and days. And so quiet time is a big piece of my self-care. I usually get that in at night when he's asleep, and it's just me, like no TV, no sound, no touching, no mommy, like none of that. And, you know, I do yoga here in my office, light a candle, kind of set the atmosphere. I usually start my day off that way. I am a lover of baths, so I have like a collection of bath salts and bath bombs and different things like that. And so, you know, how my self-care has evolved, like I kind of bought into like, you know, my self-care had to be like complicated and expensive, and like it had to be trips and like spa days and like all that, you know, kind of stuff, and hundreds of dollars. But as I have practiced myself, as my own practice has evolved, and as I've worked with my clients, I've come up with something what I think is very simple, and I call it a spa method. And it's something that I try to do something in one of those 3 categories every day, doing something smart for myself. So if that's reading or like listening to maybe like a TED talk or something like that, something physical that might be like my bath or taking a walk or doing my yoga, and then doing something affirming. So I have affirmations and stuff written on my bathroom mirror that I'll say to myself, or doing like some journaling, something to affirm myself every day. So if I can do something in those categories every day, it really helps to recharge my batteries.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think everyone's kind of touched on the idea of self-care being a learned habit over time that we kind of all go back to and redevelop that tool for ourselves. I do have to say, though, these are troubling times. And with social distancing, one of my acts of self-care was being social. I'm a very social person. I'm a Leo. I need to be out and about. And not having that, not having my, you know, for me, I love karaoke, I love singing. So getting out there with people, not having that as part of my self-care routine during these times, I personally had to really reassess what routine meant for me. And what self-care meant for me, not just right now, but also moving forward. So I'm wondering, you know, popcorn style with all you guys, how you feel our current times have kind of evolved your understanding of self-care for yourself and maybe for others as well. Anyone can jump in.
Ladies. All right.
Well, it kind of reminds me of my son. Like he's also a Leo. So yeah, August the 10th. He's a Leo baby. He is very outgoing. And so the situation we find ourselves in with COVID, being isolated from pretty much the world, hasn't been as big of a transition for me and my husband because we both work from home. Like we're used to just kind of having our lives online a lot anyway. But I can tell that it has been a lot more of a transition for him because he's 4. He is very outgoing, very much an extrovert, and he's had all those normal outlets up until this point of going to school and having his play dates and going to church and going to soccer practice. And so it's been an interesting transition trying to be creative, for things for him. So like, doing virtual play dates, it doesn't take the place of being able to be with his friends face to face and, hugging and playing with their dinosaurs and those kind of things, but at least still having that FaceTime with somebody and they can still have like their conversations, their little 4-year-old conversations, which are hilarious. But, so it's trying to be a lot more creative, I think, as a parent for him to give him some of those outlets. My assistant came by yesterday, and so we had like a social distancing kind of a date where she was in her car and we talked to her from the porch. And he loved it, having that time to be able to like talk to somebody other than just his parents. So I feel like that's probably the biggest transition or like adjustment that we've had to make as a family of how do we get some creative outlets for our son so that he is not, like going stir crazy in here with just us when he's so used to just being out and talking to people and being with people and interacting with people.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like for me, I actually found myself developing a more consistent self-care routine during this time. So before COVID, BC, I would kind of do it as I felt and as I needed. And when listening to your gut and your intuition and, I need to take a step back here, or I need to focus on doing something else right now, or I need to make sure I get meditation in today, et cetera, et cetera. And this has really put me in a position where like Tuesday mornings, this is the lineup of self-care that I'm doing. And it has kind of turned into, instead of it becoming like a meditation here and a salt bath there and some downtime here and building this, that, and the other thing into my schedule, where I have basically prioritized self-care more significantly than I have in the past. And in doing so, I've actually found that it has drastically aided, because I am not a Leo, but an Aries. And so we are also social and need to be out in the world. And so this, it's been a weird thing to like kind of know that you can't do one thing, but ultimately like your soul or who you are as a being craves those things. So having that serious routine has been really, really helpful to carve out specific time. And also I think that that's been telling myself, like, this is how important not only self-care, but the fact that you're doing this for yourself is. It kind of builds a trust system within myself also, that I'm willing to take care of myself and make that the priority. So, yeah.
I think the pandemic has changed the trajectory of our entire life. I'm an introvert, so I enjoy my space. I enjoy the comfort of my home and just blocking out everybody. I don't put myself in social situations unless I absolutely have to, and I enjoy just being with myself and my child and my own thoughts. And so the pandemic, once quarantine went into effect, I had these really bad anxiety attacks and just this really bad paranoia and this doomsday scenario just playing out in my head. And I was just trying to find some level of comfort and stability and a foundation, and really turning to family and asking these really tough questions of like, what is going to happen? All this uncertainty, it's unprecedented. We're going through this huge transition, and where I need something to hang on to because I'm about to fall off the face of the earth. And it became so overwhelming that I had to change my thought process and change the way that our lives were going. And so now we left the city. We're back on the reservation. We're living in a tent in my grandma's backyard, and we're helping my mom. She's an essential worker at the Fort Defiance Hospital on the Navajo Reservation. We're also helping with my great grandma and making sure we're going into town or buying supplies. We're making it less stressful on them because they're a vulnerable population. They're with underlying health conditions, and so we wanted to make sure we're coming back and I think in the beginning of this, my mind was so set on the logistics of everything. How do I get this done? I need to do this. I need to do this. That I was emotionally detached from everything. And I wasn't listening to my body. I wasn't listening to my emotions, my feelings, and really trying to understand how am I processing this. And so and I started to get angry and tense and bitter and anxious. And once I found some stability here and set everything up and found some type of routine, then everything settled down. I was able to find some type of self-care in all of this. And our process is always evolving. And this is a lesson learned. There's a lot of lessons in this, and I'm just trying to navigate it. And it's beautiful out here. And I'm acknowledging the blessings of my grandparents and my great-grandparents and the work that they put in for us to be able to come back and call this place home, because not a lot of people have access to land. And I'm learning to show gratitude for this space and life. And that's acknowledging gratitude.
Yeah, I think acknowledging gratitude is a really important part, for me at least, in self-care. It's kind of taking a step back. A while back, I went through a series of losses, and I was in a therapy session, and my therapist said, "Do you sing?" And I was like, "Yeah, occasionally, like for fun. I used to sing, semi-professionally when I was younger." And I was like, "Why?" She's like, "You're grabbing your throat chakra, like you're grabbing at your throat a lot when you're talking." And I didn't realize until she was saying it that with this onslaught of like one thing after another, I was in such survival mode that I wasn't, that I was avoiding this voice, that taking the time to grieve and to mourn, I wasn't giving myself that space, and I wasn't giving myself the grace to speak and to acknowledge myself. And I thought self-care meant, tell yourself it's fine and it'll be fine. And that really wasn't the case for me. And I think grieving has an important place in self-care as well. I don't know, for me during this time in COVID, I was in survival mode. And it took me a couple weeks of pretending self-care before I realized I haven't grieved, I haven't acknowledged the loss that we collectively are going through. So I'm wondering if you guys can talk, again, not just about COVID, but self-care in general, and how we as creatives, we as human beings right now, can incorporate acts of healthy grieving and acknowledgement, as well as counting our blessings. And because I feel like those two very often fly in the face of one another. But I think, Jessica, you and I were talking about these two things happening simultaneously.
Very much so. I was just going to say, it's really easy because we're human beings, right? We're human, we're energies having a human experience. And as like, it's very easy to get out of the flow of centeredness and however you describe that or see that for yourself. But I think that those things can live simultaneously, because it's not really, one doesn't really exist without the other. And the point of self-care is not really, well, it is. I mean, it is to take care of yourself, yes. But the other side of this is that knowing when something is surfacing, like Marlena was talking about, like recognizing that there's anger surfacing, or that there's these things that are happening, or there's paranoia, or there's frustration, or there's fear, or whatever it is, that is a huge part of self-care. The acknowledgement part of knowing when things are out of balance is like the first step in figuring out how you resolve that. And we are not going to bat 1,000 at this every time. I get off track. That happens. It happens. And to have compassion with yourself about the fact that it does happen is a really essential thing to practice, I think. And that takes time. You know what I mean? I didn't do it perfectly at first. I still don't do it perfectly all the time. But I mean, we even talk about, I think I had said to you, like I kind of was oscillating between like weeks on the couch and then like weeks making work. And it just had to be okay like that for a while. It had to be okay. And I found my rhythm after a little bit of time. And even occasionally, even last week, there were a couple of days where I was like, I don't think I can do this today. I think I need to dial down the knob a little and take some time for myself. And in doing so, I was able to get kind of back on the wagon a few days later, you know? So I think that especially during times right now, it's really important to have self-compassion to start that train of self-care.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. The quote that came to mind when you were talking about self-compassion is that like, if your compassion doesn't include yourself, like it's incomplete. Right. And so that idea of acknowledging that like, hey, I'm not okay today. Right. And I think that sometimes we think like, okay, self-care means I've got to like be like busy, like I've got to actively be doing something. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. I've got to do that. Well, self-care also looks like not doing a freaking thing and being okay with it. Yeah, you don't have to like occupy like every single moment with something, be it work or, you know, something that that you feel like is in your category of self-care. But I think one of the things that you said that's like critical is acknowledging how you're feeling, right? Like acknowledge like the happiness like that you're feeling and like the joy. And, you know, you don't have to be apologetic for good things happening in the middle of a pandemic, right? You can celebrate those things, but then also acknowledging that like, you know what, I have had a really shitty day, or like that was like really terrible. Like be okay with your feelings and not feel like you have to put on this persona and present yourself like, hey, I'm okay. Like if you're not okay, like it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah. The persona is suffocating. It will and it will suffocate you.
Yes, absolutely.
It will.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think just coming back home and reconnecting with family. I've been away from the reservation for since I was about 10. Now I'm 30. I just turned 32 today. So
birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy self-care birthday.
And so I'm learning to slow down. I'm learning to take my time. I'm learning because I know that I rush through the process and I just want to see my end product without appreciating the process. So if I have a goal in mind, I can see my end goal. I don't always know what it takes to reach my end goal. And so I'm constantly trying to rush things and push my process. And I think that puts me into overload. So coming here and wanting to start the planting process and wanting to start building a house and making sure everybody's safe, and we're putting in a safe routine for my mom when she gets home. And it reminds me that, okay, in Navajo we say hojongo, like it's slow down. You don't need to rush through this. You take your time. And time itself, when we calculate time from years to months to days to hours to minutes and seconds, it puts a constraint on life and how we experience it and how we understand it and how we understand ourselves. Like, it's 1:30 right now. I have to be at this meeting. And granted, there's respect for other people's time. During this experience, it's allowing ourselves to detach from that constant rat race and ultimately going within, internalizing what this experience is like, and connecting with who we are outside of that rat race. Who are we when we're detached from constantly being on the clock, constantly being tied to a desk, constantly being tied to a laptop or a computer or a phone? You know, who are we without all of these external devices constantly demanding our attention and time? You know, it's like, that's enough. Let it sit there for a while, put it on airplane mode, and I need to go work in the dirt. I need to go say some prayers and collect cedar and learn all of these really ancestral teachings that are here and need to be cultivated in this realm that I'm in this space that I'm in. And so that's my experience.
I really appreciate your sentiment about that construct of time.
Yes.
Just really quickly, for all of you guys joining us, again, thank you for being with us. If you have any comments or any questions for us to address, go ahead and put it in the group chat on the side. But on that note, with time and everything, I also wanted to piggyback on what Marlena says and go over to one thing that La Vista and I were discussing about the construct of busyness and what busyness means and how busyness is BS. So La Vista, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about self-care and the idea of busyness.
Yeah, I recently was having a conversation about this with my mother-in-law, and I was just like, I was like, it's so interesting, all of the white space that's now on my calendar. Like, I'm still productive in my business. I'm still servicing clients and I'm still developing and growing my business. But I seem to have a lot more space on my calendar. And so like, it made me start thinking like, maybe all of this stuff, like all of this business that I was doing wasn't really necessary, because not doing it, the world is still turning and things are still happening. And it's just like, okay. And so I was telling her that I think that when we go and transition into our new normal, there'll be some redefined boundaries there around, my time, like really reevaluating, like, do I really need to say yes to that? Do I really need to take that on? Do I really need to commit myself to doing that? Because I was sharing with DP that one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about self-care, especially with my clients, is, I had a former corporate life before I started working for myself. And it was a position I loved. I loved everything about it, the hustle, the bustle, the travel, like all of it. But I had such terrible time boundaries for myself where, I would sometimes have like back to back meetings and realize it'd be 3:00 in the afternoon and I haven't even left my desk to go to the bathroom yet. And if I did, I would come back to a meeting and be apologetic about, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I had to go to the bathroom. Like, who apologizes for having to go to the bathroom? Like, that's insane. Right. But it's because
red flag.
like, we are so accustomed to just being in this hustle, go, 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 go mode all of the time. And so I think that is probably a silver lining coming out of all of this. Like, okay, I don't have to be so busy. Like, I can still be productive and like get stuff done, but I don't have to be on all of the time. And so I can tell like the internal just kind of like calm, that I have. Like, I don't feel so anxious about things. The way that I'm showing up as a wife, the way that I'm showing up as a mom is different because I don't feel so frazzled, trying to adhere to this jam-packed schedule and to-do list. So that definitely is something that I'll be taking with me, going forward, because, I've seen the effect of like being too busy. And, when I had like my burnout, episode in corporate, it was gradual. It didn't just like happen. So it was like years of like having totally terrible boundaries and not taking care of myself, and sometimes working throughout the night and not sleeping, the not eating, the not exercising, like those kind of things. And when it finally just kind of came to a head, I remember being on the 202 driving into the office in a full-on panic attack. My heart is racing. I'm crying. My palms are sweating. I don't even know how I got to the office, but I remembered getting there and getting into my office, and I made 2 phone calls. And the first one was to my husband, telling him I'm coming home because something is wrong with me. And the next call I made, like, I reached out to a psychologist and was like, I think I'm going crazy. And, one of the first things that she asked me, like, are you under any stress at work? And I'm like, no. Like, this is just my normal life, right? Like, this is just what I'm used to. And, then I'm kind of telling her like what my normal day looks like. And she's looking at me like, are you insane? Like, of course, like, that's stressful. And I'm like, really? Like, oh, okay. And it ended up like having like 6 weeks of like short-term disability away from the job, just so that I could like go sit down somewhere and pay attention to what my body was telling me. Like, my body is telling me I'm tired, but I'm just like, oh, if I get like 2 more cups of coffee, I can like get through this report. Like, no, like, I'm tired. So go lay down, go get some rest. Like, my body is telling me I'm hungry. Like, I should probably feed myself. So, but when we let busyness like kind of navigate and run the show, you don't listen to yourself and those cues that your body is giving you when you need to rest and take care of yourself and, nourish yourself and those kind of things. So yeah, busyness is for the birds. Busyness it's a trap.
Yes. I would agree with you on that 100%.
Yep.
I feel like busyness is definitely some kind of enemy to actual productivity. It's a distraction. It is. And I appreciate your sentiment about having figured out all the things that were just filler that I thought that I needed to have in order to operate. And I don't need that stuff. And the white space that you're talking about has actually been really beneficial, weirdly, or not weirdly at all, actually, to my practice as a creative, but has also lent itself quite significantly to my practice in energy work as well.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, I would agree. Like, I feel like I have been more creative in just like in everything, just because like I've had that space to just like be, right? And like things will just kind of come to me like, oh, like I could do this, or I could do this way. Like, I feel like my creativity is like really on like a whole nother level because I'm not so saturated with busyness.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think one issue that I struggle with, and I'm sure a lot of us struggle with, is after working for so many years, after being out of school for so many years, the idea that busyness is somehow tied to your self-worth, that being productive is being busy, and that being busy and stressed and tired and not having time and whatever, that is somehow success, and that is somehow that is your worth, that is your value, and that doing that more makes you a better person. And I really think that one lesson we're all living right now is realizing that doesn't make sense. That's not care. That's not grace. That's not compassion for you or for others who are learning from you. And it's not a productive way to view yourself. And I think a lot of people probably struggle with this notion of battling between the arbitrary dichotomy between self-care and selfishness. I don't know, as you all, as mothers, as caretakers, I'm sure that there's a struggle with setting time for yourself, and maybe the perception of others seeing self-care as not being a good caregiver for others. And I'm sure your guys' experience can go to the contrary of that. So maybe Marlena, how do you feel being a caregiver to so many people right now? How do you feel with this idea, again, of like selfishness, but making sure that self-care is embedded in your care of others as well?
So I think that was a very tough lesson to learn. I used to be the expressive art facilitator of Community Bridges, which is a substance abuse and behavioral health nonprofit. And I started out as the assistant to the directors, and they didn't have a expressive art program in place at the time. And I was just learning to, I was just coming into art as my own way of cultivating a healthy outlet. And I proposed a program. They gave me all of the supplies. They gave me my own program. I ran with it. It felt like everything fell into place. I had my own clients. I had just everything laid out for me. And I was like, all right, this is it. Like, this is mine. This is my baby. I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to go into these sites and do these art programs with clients who are detoxing off of these sometimes horrendous drugs. They're dealing with their own behavioral health issues. And I want to be able to introduce art as a healthy outlet to them. I want to go into these spaces and share my experience, how I came into art. You know, I went through a hard time with drugs and alcohol, and sober now 6 years. And I wanted to share that art was a way for me to support this journey so far. And so about 6 months into the program, I started to burn out. I started to get really angry and tired and frustrated and just not listening to my body and just going. I need to do this. I need to go to this site. I need to do this workshop. I need to pack up all my supplies for this other site. And I was like, what is this? Like, I know I felt this feeling before. I know what this is. What is going on right now? And so I called my mom, and she's my safe haven. She said, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to go talk to somebody? Do you want to go to prayer? Do you want to go to ceremony? And I said, yeah, I want to go see the medicine people and hear what they have to say and get some guidance through this. And we did. And they said, you're going into these spaces and you're not protecting yourself. You're not, some people have stuff that they've held on to in terms of trauma, and you're going into these spaces unprotected, and it's latching onto you and it's pulling you back down. And so you need to either detach yourself from this work until you learn what it means to self-care, whether that's protecting your energy or listening to your body, or learning how to eat, managing your time, prioritizing your life. And so that was a really tough lesson to learn, because I felt like I'd been given this huge, amazing opportunity and I couldn't hack it. And so it really made me take a step back and understand that if I'm relearn the lesson that I thought I was trying to give, I can't take care of any of this other stuff until I take care of myself. It always goes back to that. And
Always, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was going to say, I always use the metaphor of until my cup is full enough for me, I don't have enough to give to you. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. And to talk about that whole idea between like selfishness versus self-care, by no means do I think that people shouldn't be helping or networking or being a part of each other's spaces. But you have to be aware of what you are able to take on. And all the things that you were talking about, I completely resonate with. When I was young and doing energy work and Reiki and even in creating art, I was working. I mean, that's all energy. Everything works that way. But that whole beginning period of time, especially when I was trying to jump into certain things with Reiki and with doing energy work with other people, I was absorbing all that stuff and being sensitive in that way. And a lot of artists, visual artists are, it bogs down your whole system and it clogs up all your chakra system. It clogs up your energy fields. It makes things really difficult to see clearly. And I, in my experience, I started to get really confused. What's mine? What's not mine? How do I know if this feeling is really something that's coming from me that I need to look at or that I need to address, or if this is something that I'm picking up from somebody else? And when I was saying in the beginning that process of evolution of self-care grows and has grown as I've worked in both of these arenas, I think that everything that you're saying is totally spot on about having to find that space within yourself in order to be able to bring that space to other people.
Yeah. And so from the standpoint of self-care and selfishness, my point of view is that self-care is selfish. I mean, it is the care of yourself. And so where I think the mindset shift needs to happen is that we have to let go of the guilt and be okay and give ourselves permission to use like our time and our energy and our resources to take care of ourselves. And so I know like in my circles a lot, the analogy of, being on the airplane and the oxygen mask comes down and it's, you're putting that on so that you can help other people. Well, if we look at it just a little bit differently, that you're not putting that mask on so that you can help other people. You're putting the mask on because you yourself need to breathe. Period.
Yep.
And by putting that mask on and by breathing and by being okay, taking care of other people is like an amazing byproduct, right? Like if I'm okay, I show up better as a mom. When I'm okay, I show up better as a wife. When I'm okay, I show up better as a friend. When I'm okay, I show up better for my clients. But doing those things to take care of myself literally has nothing to do with them. It has everything.
It's true.
Everything to do with me because, at the end of the day, like I'm the only one that can be in control of how I'm being taken care of. And so I totally think that your self-care is selfish, should be, but we have to be okay with giving ourselves permission to put ourselves first. We don't have to be at the bottom of our to-do list, of our priority list. And that's helping even to like show other people like how to treat us. In preparation for this, DP and I had a conversation even about, my son, he's 4, but we had, you've seen like those quizzes that are around like on Facebook, like ask your child like these like 10 questions and, get their responses. And one of the questions was, who loves you the most? And his answer was, I do, as like he was talking about himself. And I was like, I'm like, like, okay, if there's like one thing that I'm doing right, it is showing him that it is okay for him to take care of him, that his needs matter, and that, his needs matter, and that they need to be taken care of. And when I was talking to my husband about it, he was like, are you surprised that was his answer? He sees you prioritizing yourself every day. And that's not to say that like I prioritize myself to neglect him, like that's not the case, but he sees me taking those walks and taking my time in my office to read and to have my quiet time. And he'll see me do yoga, and he'll come in the office and do yoga with me, those kind of things. And even more now that we have been, in quarantine, like I'll even see him go up to his room and play dinosaurs like on his own, because he's recognizing like I need a break from like the stimulus that's going around, in the house. And he goes and he has his little alone time. And the first few times he did it, I'm like going upstairs and checking like, where is my kid? But then I realized like, oh, like he's having his time, right? So it's just like, okay, yeah, like your self-care, it's all about you. It is selfish, and it's okay for that to be the case.
Yeah, and I think we've all had to unlearn bad examples of self-care that we've learned from others, whether it be a guardian or a mentor or a boss or something like that. I certainly have had to unlearn unhealthy things that are, I should say, things that are unhealthy for me that might be fine for other people, I guess. But I think we all have to kind of unlearn stuff in our history. And right before we get to the questions that we have from the audience, I kind of wanted to end with asking the question, again, as artists, as creatives, as professionals, we've all talked about areas of burnout in our lives, especially right now. I know there's students who are graduating and struggling to find, jobs and internships. I know there are, students who are finishing up their master's thesis without studios to exhibit their work in. I've been there myself when I was a master's student and didn't have a space and didn't know what to do. And especially when you're dealing with personal work, especially if you are in, your thesis deals with something very personal, that burnout can be so detrimental to your productivity in your work, in your artwork, in your creative lives, in your professional lives. I mean, just look at, I'm sure we've all written a paper, an essay, or a grant really hyped up on caffeine or like really without sleep. And then you read it the next day after a good night rest and you're like, what was I thinking? And so those areas of burnout that sometimes we don't acknowledge are important. So I'm wondering if you could touch a little bit on how you address burnout in your own lives.
So with myself, since I have experienced burnout, one of the ways that I keep it at bay is having good boundaries. It really is boundaries around my time. Because, they say that whatever you say yes to, you're saying no to something else. And I don't want that no to be me, and my health and my well-being. So, that definitely is something that's like always really on like the forefront of my mind. Like even, especially from the perspective of being an entrepreneur, it's very easy to let work just kind of take over, so your work really, no matter what your vocation is, like your work will expand to the time that you give it. And so I could very easily be in my office like 12, 13, 14 hours a day, just doing stuff. But instead, I have very set hours, and it's like, I'm going to work from this time to this time. And there's rituals behind it. Like I come into my office, I light my candle on my desk, I begin my work, and that is the time that is like dedicated to the things that I need to do for, the business, for my clients, networking, those kind of things. When that time is up, I have to acknowledge that that work is fine to carry over into the next day, because it's always going to be there. Like you're never not going to have something that needs to be done. And I blow that candle out and I leave this space and I go downstairs, and, that's the time that I'm with my family or that I'm with my friends, back when we could be with our friends. But, and I have no guilt being in the office, because I know that like I'm concentrating on what I need to concentrate on here, and being with my family. Like I couldn't care less if an email is coming in at that point when I'm sitting down on the floor playing Hot Wheels with my son, because this is my son's time. This is the time that I have put in place, that this is like my family time. So like those time boundaries are like critical for me. And then also recognizing when I need to extend grace to myself, because you're not always going to knock it out of the park every day. You know, as a boss, as a wife, as a mom, as a friend, like I'm an imperfect person. I'm perfectly imperfect. And so I'm not going to get a home run every day. I need to extend grace to myself, just like, you know, I need to extend grace to other people. So those are the two things that that I really kind of rely upon to not go back to that place where I was, where I did experience burnout, because I don't want anybody to ever experience that, because it sucks, right? Like it's just a terrible experience. And it takes so much to get back to feeling like you again, once you've gotten to a place where you just are so depleted and exhausted and you literally have nothing to give. So yeah, those are my two things: boundaries and grace.
Yeah, I would agree with that. DP, to touch on what you were talking about, I was one of the people that created a really intense body of work for a thesis. And I burned out from doing that and finishing grad school. And I want to say that I made maybe one solid piece of work in a 2-year span because of that. And so I'm a person who learns by lessons. And so I learned that lesson very difficultly. It was like part of the silver lining is that I did learn that like I cannot live without creating. So that was good to know. That was a good thing to figure out. But it did take a little bit of time and a lot of self-care and a big journey in self-healing in order to get back to a space where I felt like I could make work again. But the boundary thing that LaVista was talking about is one of the major components that got me back to my practice as an artist. Because I really had to start to distill, and those boundaries have tightened up over time and as they have needed to increase. You know what I mean? Like I didn't walk out of the gate with being like, okay, and these are my boundaries. I didn't know them yet. I didn't know what I needed yet. It was a learning curve for me. But I think that being able to say, this is the allotted time here, or this is the amount of time that I'm going to work on this, or this is the space where I've carved out installation time, or et cetera, et cetera. I think that those things, and also boundaries on my time from other people, being able to say, I can't get taxed this much by these people or this person or this activity or this distraction or whatever it is. As you've been saying, it allowed me to choose myself and prioritize what I wanted to do first. Mm-hmm. And just to jump into that last thing that you were talking about with selfishness, I was thinking perhaps the issue is that we need to redefine what selfishness should be or is. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because that's really that word has such a...
it's got a bad rap.
Yeah.
It's got a bad rap. I don't think it has to. And like totally like I think that, you know, a little bit of tweaking and it's just like, yeah, like I'm okay being selfish.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the burnout is real and it happens. And the goal, I think now for me and maintaining those boundaries and all that self-care stuff that we've been talking about has helped me sustain not doing that again. I do see traces of it from here, you know what I mean? But it's not quite how it was. Like my burnout might last. Like it often happens when I'm putting on a huge exhibition or something that requires a lot of energy. And it just is the way that it is, especially when you're like leading up to a big show or something, the time, it just consumes you a little. But it is always a ever progressing or evolving structure, trying to manage it. But it's better that it went from 2 years to like a month instead of it being like another 2 years. So yeah.
I think burnout is a part of the ego. I think and when I say ego, I think it's wanting, it's pushing, it's forcing the process. It's pushing a person to want a final product, want that instant gratification, and without really experiencing that process as a whole. And I think I know that my ego and when I talk about instant gratification and even social media, I can equate it to constantly having to post, or how do I get my follows up? How do I get my likes up? How do I take this picture from this angle and put a cute caption and make sure I'm, while social media can serve its purpose, it can drain the humility out of a person. It can kind of alter a person's perception of themselves. And I'm trying to learn. That's been my experience in the past with ego, especially within my artwork, kind of getting away from art as self-care and just wanting to sell. How do I sell this piece? How do I make it, how am I making artwork for somebody else rather than for myself? And that's a part of the ego. And I'm trying to remember why I started creating, why I started making art. It was for me, and it was my selfish self-care that took care of me. Whereas once a monetary value was placed on it, then it became something different, and it became something outside of myself that I couldn't appreciate and I couldn't connect to. And where does that stem from? Like, really asking why am I allowing this to take place? Why am I allowing my ego to speak for me? And that's, in essence, shadow work. That's looking at the other side of myself. I think for me personally, there's a masculine side and there's a feminine side. There's a light and there's a dark. And really going into that dark side and unleashing my traumas and facing them. And, one thing that I was reading, and I bring up the Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh. He wrote a book called Fear. And one of my favorite parts in that book, he talks about disturbing thoughts. And he says, like, when you have a disturbing thought or something that just pops up out of nowhere and it makes you feel uncomfortable, to sit with it, to say, hello, I hear you, I acknowledge you, thank you for presenting yourself, goodbye. And that has been, that's for me that's been my go-to. That's been how I've been able to keep moving forward, because if I get stuck in that space, that's burnout. That for me is depression, or just pushing myself over the limit without hearing everything underlying. So it's a lot of acknowledgement. It's a lot of internal work and shadow work.
Yeah, I think those are lessons that we can all benefit from hearing about and learning. Thank you for sharing that. One of our questions comes from Larissa Washington, who asks, she asks basically, are there any ways or tools that you all recommend on how to recognize looming stressors before they impact your life? In what ways can we keep the balance between self-care and business during these times, and recognize how to deal with those looming stressors?
So I would say that one of the ways to kind of start to learn about stressors is what I call learning your yes and your no. So that's something that happens in, I think in your, I would call it your gut or your heart chakra area in between those two spaces. That's your gut feeling. That's also known as your intuition. If you are feeling something is amiss, then it's time to start searching in the shadow section, like Marlena was talking about. It's time to start looking at the root. I always start with a series of questions like, what is this? If I sit quietly with myself, what is popping up when I'm thinking about whatever this emotion is or whatever it is that's bothering me? And then I ask myself, how far down in the root system of this thing can I go? Where can I see where it's, what things are being highlighted that are coming to the surface as I'm exploring this feeling? And it doesn't have to be, I've gotten so far into this feeling that I'm frustrated now, although sometimes that happens because we are busy with distractions that don't keep us in alignment or in tune with hearing our inner voices. But the other thing can just be something feels amiss, something feels remiss, something doesn't feel right. And a lot of that comes with practice of learning yourself and spending time with yourself and spending that quiet time with yourself. The more that you spend time with yourself, the more likely you are going to be to not only kind of pinpoint and source where those things are coming from, but learn it. You'll have a better understanding of the best way to navigate it for you.
Yeah. And I would just add that the idea of balance in and of itself, like, creates conflict, right? Like there's something that is like playing against the other thing to balance out. We're looking at your self-care and your business, look at ways to actually infuse those things. Like, how do I take care of myself while also doing this thing for my business? How do I take care of myself while being creative? How do I take care of myself while also being productive? They are not mutually exclusive. Like, you don't have to choose taking care of yourself and doing, the work that you love. It's not a choice, it's both.
Yeah, and just kind of going off of that, knowing that everything is intertwined, it's all connected. So if I'm focusing on my physical health, that's affecting my emotional, my spiritual, and my mental. If I'm focusing on my spiritual health, that's affecting physical, emotional, and mental. And so those are all interwoven. They're all connected. And listening to each of those areas and trying to find practices that acknowledge each of those areas so that they can work cohesively. And this is my cohesive bubble. So I think that balance is a strong factor. Thank you.
I would also add to all the remarks, I think communication is also really key. Being able to communicate out to people. I don't have the tools to always help myself and to always save myself. I don't have all the answers. I think it's really important to communicate out to supervisors, to subordinates, to family members, to friends, to loved ones, when help is needed, or when something is too much, or when a boundary needs to be set, or care needs to be given, or assistance, or something like that. Being able to communicate that for me has been such a hard lesson to learn, but such a valuable lesson to learn. And it goes into the last question we have, which will be kind of my answer for it, which are what are some small first steps that you would suggest for people who what are some small first steps you would suggest for people to practice self-compassion, especially related to how they face their creative work?
Well, I guess I would say if we're talking about self-compassion as it relates to your creative work, I would definitely implore people to fail at stuff, which I know sounds counterintuitive, but I would say show some self-compassion in that every piece is not a Picasso. Every piece is not going to be, a home run. It's just not. It's just not. And that being okay with that gives you a lot of room and permission to work off of those things. Example, if you're working on a piece and you're like, well, these things are not quite fitting, or however it is, whatever your medium or practice is, and you allow yourself the space to say, okay, that didn't work, or that way didn't work, or I'm not really sure. You're showing yourself a little bit of compassion by not getting it right, because in fact, compassion is really just negating the necessity or need or thought need that of perfection. And we do not need to continue to torture ourselves with perfectionism. It is not fun. And it's not constructive. And it's definitely not constructive to your creative practice. It's like really detrimental to that. And that's something that I struggle with all the time. But as artists, we want our stuff to be visually impactful and conceptually impactful and all of that. So allowing yourself the space to fail and experiment and make mistakes and try again provides a lot of space for you to get it right, or to find the thing that feels right. And as I was saying, like, prime example is that when you don't find those things fit together and then you put that thing aside and start working on another version of the piece, sometimes those pieces all fall together in a space that you wouldn't realize that they do, because you allowed yourself to see things from all different perspectives and gave yourself permission for it to not be perfect in the one way that you saw it in your mind. Yeah. Resilience.
And, one thing that I would suggest is taking on the ritual of doing some regular check-ins with yourself. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I do with my clients is I have them at least once a week go through a series of, and it's just 3 questions. It's, how do I feel? What do I need? And what do I choose to celebrate? And so it's just like, how am I feeling? And that will kind of give you, like, if you're honest with yourself, give you some indicators like, okay, maybe there's just some things that I need to tweak or whatever to make sure that I'm okay. And what do you need? Just like DP was saying, like, hey, maybe I need to talk to my partner or whatever about, getting some extra support or like a boundary or something like that needs to be in place. But then, what do you want to celebrate? Like, a lot of times, like, we don't celebrate like our progress. Like, Jessica was saying, like, we're always striving for perfection. And it's like, we don't give ourselves credit for the things that we're doing, the progress that we're making, the small achievements that, are happening along the way. So like intentionally, like purposefully, like celebrating those things along the way. So that would be my suggestion, doing that regular introspection and checking in with yourself and being honest with yourself when you're doing it.
I really like just going back to the social component. We talked about emotional and mental, physical and spiritual, but also there's a social component that during times of unease, reaching out to trusted sources, friends, family, confidants that you can allow yourself to be vulnerable with. I think that's vital to the process of life. Going through this quarantine and all of these big changes, I chose to completely shut myself off and deal with it on my own, how I wanted to do it, and really dominate that space. And it just led to further burnout, and it didn't allow me to reach out to others and tell them how I'm feeling, tell them to communicate with my partner, communicate with my friends. So last night I'm in a sorority, it's Kappa Delta Chi, and we had our little meetup on Zoom. And this was the first social friendly meetup I've had since quarantine started. The first time ever. And it was nice to hear how my friends are doing, how my sisters are doing, and to hear their stories. One of my sorority sisters is a nurse on the COVID unit in Chicago, and she is a very strong-willed individual, but she also doesn't allow herself to communicate how she's feeling. And with all of these, the different essential workers and what they're experiencing, whether you're in the hospital or civilian, trying to navigate all of this, we need to be able to communicate and understand and reflect on what we're feeling and bounce it off of each other and really hear a new perspective and give as much guidance and communicate. It's the art of communication. How do we articulate what is going on internally so that we can release it and process it and understand it and move forward to the next step of it.
Thank you. Well, I just want to say thank you all very much for joining us, all the audience members for joining us, and our esteemed panelists. I have learned so much from all of you throughout this entire experience. This has been Assembly Required, Self-Care and Resilience for Artists and Creatives. Again, I want to highlight for those who weren't here in the beginning, Jessica Muro, Marlena Robbins, and LaVista Jones. Their QR codes are down there to get to their websites. Thank you all very much. Everyone else, join us for our upcoming panels next week. We've got 2 panels, one on exploring creative identity and acts of persistence, and the other is all about when public space becomes risky space. So again, thank you for joining us. My name's DP Layton, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Assembly Required.